Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and man have I got some exciting news for you today. There's some huge Hearthstone news, probably some of the biggest we've ever had in one load, and it's all surrounding around the Year of the Dragon announcement. So once every year Hearthstone rotates into a new year. It always happens in around April time, so upon the release of the first expansion of the year. They haven't announced what that expansion is yet, but they have said that it's going to be Year of the Dragon, and they've announced some really cool stuff which is going to shake up the game in a good way in my opinion, and stuff which is really we've all been waiting for. So let's get into it. Firstly, the key issue is that 9 cards are going to be rotated into the Hall of Fame. And just to explain that for people who don't know, these are cards that go out of standard. You can still use them in wild, but they go out of standard into the Hall of Fame. And it just means you'll get a full refund on any of these cards that you've got. So full dust refund to spend on other cards, but they can no longer be used in standard. And the 2 big cards that they start off with are Baku the Mooneater and also Genn Greymane. So this is incredible. These are 2 cards which, if you play a lot of Hearthstone, you've probably started to become a little bit frustrated with, particularly Baku the Mooneater, I would say, just because they create these very powerful decks that are very similar. Odd Paladin, I would say, is probably the biggest offender. It's a very cheap deck, which is a good thing, because it allows new players, free-to-play players, to have a good deck to play. But the problem is, it didn't change since it came into the game. Basically, when this rotates out, when these go into the Hall of Fame, it will mean they've only been in the game for a year. But throughout that whole year, they're just constantly on top of the game, basically. Odd Paladin's always been good. Even since the recent nerf to level up, Odd Paladin was still around. It was still very strong. And the main problem which a lot of people have talked about with these decks is they always play out the same, because you have these deck restrictions, which initially seems like quite a cool deck building mechanic, because you have to consider the limitations of taking odd or even cards out of your deck. It seems quite cool, but in reality what happens is it just limits the amount of cards you have, so that every game kind of plays out the same. And when a new expansion comes out, 1 card comes out of that deck and 1 card goes back, and 1 new card goes in, and the deck plays exactly the same. You always look to play your hero power, then a card, hero power, then a card, and your hero power is the same every time you do it. And if you're pressing it all the time throughout the game, it just kind of makes your gameplay the same. So Blizzard has decided to actually rotate them out, and their main reasoning for this, and what they actually said the reasoning was they were worried if it stayed in standard that it would overshadow what they do in the new expansions for Year of the Dragon. We saw that with Rustichan and also with Boomsday. They came out, they had some really cool cards, really cool concepts, but nobody could play them because Baku and Genn really kind of overshadowed them. Overshadowed the new cards, and meant we just had to stick with those same old decks. So this, honestly, for me, is fantastic news. Losing both these cards, it just drops the whole power level of decks that are possible down, which opens up a whole new range of decks and a whole new possibilities for the meta. Because honestly, the game has just been kind of dragging, really, and myself, I would put a lot of it down to these 2 cards having to kind of funnel these style of decks on people. Now, I know a lot of people who make 1 deck or can only afford 1 deck will either have an odd or an even deck because they're so powerful, and be really upset seeing these cards move, because it means they'll lose their deck and they'll have to make another one. Well, I can completely sympathize with that, because it's frustrating when you haven't got many cards and you've got a deck and it gets nerfed. Well, the thing about it is, though, that in my opinion, once you've changed out of, if you've been playing just a Baku deck, so if you've just been playing Odd Paladin, you've been having success with it, I think once you move on to a different deck, you'll just enjoy the game more, in my opinion anyway, because the games have just become more varied, the people you're playing against will be more varied, and it's just a better game, in my opinion. So hopefully that will be the situation for you if you're one of these people that is losing a card that you really like. But for me, a very good thing for the game. And along with this change, they're also rotating Black Cat. This is because obviously it hinges very much on Baku. The same goes for Gloomstag. Who cares? who actually played this card in the first place. Merkspark Eel was the other one that was played in Even Shaman, actually. That's rotating too. And finally, Glitter Moth, which most of you probably didn't even realise was a card because also was very, very bad. Might try and make this work actually before it rotates. But those are all rotating into the Hall of Flame. And the good news is if you've got any of these cards, you get to keep them. Although you can't play them in standard, you get to keep them, but you also get the full dust refund. So there's a positive. So alongside of this, they've also made some change to some classic cards, which we saw, we've seen them kind of move to in the last couple of nerfs. And again, in my opinion, these ones are pretty decent. So the first one coming up is Naturalize. Now, Naturalize hasn't always been a good card for Druid because the downside is pretty huge. Giving your opponent 2 cards is a huge downside. It gives them loads of extra fuel. If you're playing against an aggro deck, it's just exactly what they want. They want you to, if they play a minion, you have to naturalize it, but they get 2 more cards. It just refuels them, which is a downside of having an aggro deck. But recently, the meta over the last year or so, maybe a bit longer than a year, in games that go on much longer, the punish of Naturalize kind of has been reduced. So it's come back into the game. And I think what the Blizzard's reasoning was that Druid has an identity of being a class which struggles to deal with individual big minions. They don't have any ways to get rid of individual big minions. I would argue the same with AoE. They don't have many good AoE options. But Naturalize, since it became playable, really just means they got a very good way to remove big minions on your opponent's side of the board, and synergizing with things like Togwaggle, etc. It just became a powerful card. It became very good. So this again is a move which allows them to kind of realign Druid into where they want it to be, and also I think it just adds some variety. We've seen this card, we've played with this card a lot. It's nice for it to move on. So that's one moving. Next one is Doomguard. This one's a bit of a surprise because it's obviously got its downsides too. Battlecry of discarding 2 random cards is massive. It's a huge downside unless you can synergize it with other cards. And Blizzard has tried to introduce lots of synergy cards which are fun and interesting. One being the Carnivorous Cube, and others being like the Lackey that cheats out demons, Skull of the Minari, which is the weapon for Warlock. These cards kind of cheat out demons in an interesting way, but when you've got a powerful effect like Charge, it kind of gets frustrating, and we saw that with Cube Lock over and over again. Just how frustrating is it to play Cube on a Doomguard and then play Dark Pact and then you're dead, when they play Gul'dan and they all come back. And actually Blizzard has moved away from the charge mechanic quite a lot recently, and I think that's good. They replaced it with Rush, and I think Rush is a much better mechanic, a really fun and interesting mechanic. But Charge just creates too many feel bad situations for your opponent anyway, which in some cases can be you. So I'm quite happy to see this go. They also said the a powerful charge minion doesn't really fit with the Warlock class, which is typically a control class, and I have to agree. So again, this just helps them to reset that class and open up new options for them to release cool cards which don't get abused by a Doomguard. So that one's also rotating. Another good thing in my opinion. Next up is Divine Favor. This one isn't played so much at the moment, so it's not really a problem right now, but it has been in the past, and really a frustrating problem mostly for aggro decks that just put minions on the board. Because one of the downsides of playing an aggro deck is that you don't have a lot of fuel. You put a lot of tempo on the board, your cards are generally lower cost, so you can play more in one turn, but once your hand gets depleted, that's when your opponent, who's typically playing, if they're playing a control deck, that's when you can start to think, right, now I'm overcoming the aggro. Now I've got I'm starting to turn the corner, I'm starting to be able to play cards that can counter this, and they're running out of fuel. Well, if they just suddenly play a Divine Favor, they fuel back up again, and then they just push the final damage that they need. It's a lot like Myra's Unstable Element without any single downside. Myra's Unstable Element obviously draws your whole deck in Rogue, and discards cards which you can't hold in your hand, whereas this, it just draws cards until you have as many as your opponent. with the only downside being if you're playing against another aggro deck, you're unlikely to get much value out of it. So this is rotating. Another good thing, in my opinion. I don't think I think it's just too strong. It's just such a good card. You could get 3 mana to draw 6 or 7 cards sometimes. So I'm pleased to see that go. It's another good step for Blizzard, and it all kind of encompasses the situation they've come into of Hearthstone kind of becoming stale. And lots of people have talked about the classic and basic sets just being around forever. There's obvious advantages for that, and Blizzard have held on to it for so long because of free-to-play players have cards that they can always hold on to, are always going to be in the game. Players that dip in and out once every couple of weeks or once a month or something will come back and their cards are still there, and it kind of and those players are important too. We need to have this varied base of players because it just creates Hearthstone as it is. There's always plenty of games, a huge player base, and you need to look after all of the players. But the problem is, and it's really come to a point where Hearthstone is 5 years old now, that it's just too samey. If you've been playing the same card for 5 years, that is a long time when you think about it, and it just becomes stale, and it stops them kind of creating new cards which might be less powerful than this, because it ultimately comes back to, I'll just play Divine Favor, or I'll just play Naturalize, and that's what they're trying to remove. So this is another good change in my opinion. So that's it for the cards moving to the Hall of Fame. Some really, really good things there in my opinion. But they didn't stop there. They also announced some really cool stuff for the Year of the Dragon. They talked about, firstly, making the story cohesive throughout the whole of the year. So each of the expansions will have a continuous story. Blizzard has always had quite a good reputation for writing good story and good lore to their games, and Hearthstone doesn't really have that. It does in a lot of ways, but it's not. You know, the single player adventures have never been a great story or a huge focus of it. So this could be something that's quite cool. Honestly, it's not something I play Hearthstone for, but you know, if it's fun and it's interesting, they add some good villains, some good heroes, it could be fun. So that's a positive. Let's hope they do it good and write a good story to go along with it. But what I'm really interested in and quite excited about is the new solo adventure content. So there are some upsides and some downsides to this. So the upside is they're looking at a more in-depth solo mode. And basically what they're saying is it's going to be focused on the dungeon run, which came out in Kobolds and Catacombs, and I loved that. I thought it was brilliant. It had some downsides, definitely, but it was fun. It was a bit simplistic, but it was fun. So what they're doing is they're focusing on that, and then there's going to be 5 chapters that come out throughout the year that are going to be in that same dungeon run, which I think is a great idea. So hopefully they'll be adding new characters, new bosses, new modes, etc. throughout the year. The downside is that we will now have to pay for that. So when the first expansion launches in April, a month afterwards, the first single player content chapter will launch. We do get that for free, but then throughout the year there'll be 4 more chapters, each costing 700 gold or $20 for the whole thing. So $20 for all of the chapters, or 2,800 gold, 2,800 gold for all the chapters. So you can still buy it with gold, which is great actually. It's good of them to do that. And in my opinion, $20 is not a lot of money to pay for this if they do it right. I really, really hope they do this right, because I am playing a lot of Slay the Spire at the moment. And if you haven't played Slay the Spire, you really, really should. I think it's excellent. It's basically the same as Dungeon Run mode, but a much, much deeper, more replayable and just better version of that. So I'm hoping so much that Blizzard has looked at that kind of style of game and gone, okay, let's make our own. Because I've been thinking about this. I've been playing Slay the Spire so much over the last couple of months. I've been thinking to myself, I really wish Blizzard would do this, because I know they could make a really good one. They already started it with Dungeon Run. It was a bit simplistic. Now make it better. And they've talked about a few of the features that can go into this. There's anomaly mode, I'm not sure what that will be. Heroic mode, obviously a hard difficulty, great, good idea. That adds more replayability. Tavern encounters is kind of like these non-combat encounters, which is no details on, but could be quite interesting. 27 hero powers, 36 starter decks, 5 chapters, so that's a chapters released throughout the year, 75 bosses, Track your victories, which, you know, that should be done anyway. Pause mid-game. Okay, that's good. Zale Shadow Cloak. 15 card packs and 1 golden classic pack. So that last thing there is quite good. So there's 5 chapters. Every chapter you finish, you will be rewarded with 3 packs of that expansion. So that's quite good. It's not exactly the repeatable rewards I wanted from something like this. I would prefer that you could earn gold from something like this. I know that it can't be too lucrative. You don't want people grinding this all day and just getting loads and loads of gold. I know that. But something simple like, you know, when the dungeon run was kind of 8 bosses, maybe if they gave you like 20 or 30 gold for finishing one, something small like that I think would be good. But anyway, 3 packs is still great. And then if you finish all 5 chapters across the year, you will get a golden classic pack. Again, pretty cool. And a card pack as well. A card back. Kind of not that interesting. So, no more details have been released about it, but I, for one, am excited about this. I just hope they get it right. If it's just going to be another dungeon run, I'll play it. I think it's fun, but I'll play it for a week. If they really get this, nail this, and get it like Slay the Spire, I'll play this for ages, based on the amount of time I've played in Slay the Spire for. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Blizzard can do here. The next bit of interesting news is that they've added to Arena something really, really interesting, and something that I really hope that one day will come to Standard, and maybe not Standard as it is, but maybe a separate mode of Standard. And like we could play a ladder experience with this, and that is they're adding new expansions or old expansions into Arena. So they're rotating the sets which are available in Arena. So it's no longer going to be the same as Standard. It's going to be old sets, new sets, just a mishmash. And I think that is a really cool idea, because sets that have been rotated out years ago, that would be a fantastic way to relive those through Arena. It would be great to play some of those old cards again, and in a way where you can't play the cards every time because Arena is a draft. Just having them come up randomly is a fun way to do it. And they've said that the first rotation, the Arena draft pool, will contain Basic, Classic, Curse of Naxxramas, Whispers of the Old Gods, Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, Witchwood, and the first expansion of this year, which is coming in April. Really, really cool idea, and I hope that one day we will have Arena, we'll have Standard as it is, and then we'll have exactly the same as Standard mode, but with rotating sets. So different sets from the past and present. So we can have 3 modes in that way. That does fragment the player base a bit, but man, that would be so much fun. If 1 month they just said, okay, on ladder this month you can now play Naxxramas cards, that would be cool. Again, not so cool for free-to-play players, but for people who have been playing the game a long time, that's quite an interesting thing, which is why it'd be cool. Maybe they could keep Standard ladder intact and add that as a different mode. But that's another thing. I hope that sometime in the future that can be added. They also talked about some small new things. You're now going to be able to re-roll legendary quests. Not something I'd ever do, because legendary quests always give you something fun, but sometimes people didn't want to do them. So you can re-roll them, and then it gives you a normal daily quest again. So that's something nice that's being added. Also, they seem quite excited about this, but it's a very small feature. But you can now pick, from your collection of card backs, you can pick a random card back. So every time you start a game, it will just pick a random one from your collection. Again, a very, very simple feature, which should have been in the game a long time ago, but a welcome one. I think that would be quite cool. So guys, that's all I wanted to talk about from this announcement. There was another couple of small things, but nothing too interesting. So really, really cool news. I really am excited for Hearthstone now. They needed to change something. That is the key. In my opinion, and a lot of others people's opinion, they needed to change. The game's 5 years old. That is a long time. If they want it to go for another 5 years, they need to keep it fresh, and this is going to be a good way to do that. So I am really looking forward to the future now. Hopefully in the next kind of month or so, we'll hear about the new expansion, and with no Genn or Baku. Brilliant. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.